So, after the annexation of Crimea by Russia in March 2014, Crimea has remained pretty much under Russian control and is now well integrated with the Russian state. After the annexation, there's a lot of infrastructure that has been built in Crimea, as well as a bridge that links Crimea to Russia, and essentially it's now under de facto Russian control. Now in Ukraine and in eastern Ukraine the situation is more complex, and although there was a peace agreement reached in 2015, in February 2015, known as the Minsk Agreement, there have been numerous ceasefire violations. Nowhere near, the violence hasn't escalated as high as it was in the second part of 2014 or the beginning of 2015, but as of recent there have been clashes between separatists and Ukrainian forces in eastern Ukraine that happened just a couple of weeks ago. So it's an ongoing conflict which some experts have referred to as frozen conflict in Crimea, and perhaps the best hopes for Ukraine is to move towards a frozen conflict in the future. This means that there wouldn't be a lot of clashes on the ground, just as in Crimea there aren't clashes on the ground, even though it's under de facto Russian control. But there is a frozen conflict means there is a disagreement between the de facto situation on the ground and the de jure situation. So one of the states, such as Russia, claims control of Crimea and Ukraine disagrees. And this is now, although it's not a violent situation, it is a frozen conflict. Essentially, for Russia, this is, although Russia has suffered a lot of economic costs because of the annexation, because the European Union and United States and Western sanctions are essentially still in place, and they're degrading Russia's economy, and Putin's popularity is fading. So domestically, Russia is incurring quite a lot of costs, but for Russia, having a frozen conflict in Ukraine such as this is beneficial because it can use it as a mechanism to basically drive Ukraine away from Western advances, or to slow down Ukraine's drift towards the West, and to serve as a stumbling block of the alignment, the further alignment between Ukraine and the West. So essentially, by having a de facto, what we call a de facto state that is not recognized by international community, but it is controlled by Russia, that is Crimea, by controlling tensions in eastern Ukraine, because Russia does support to an extent the separatists, Russia can use these instabilities that it creates as a way to control Ukraine's domestic politics and drive it further away from, drive Ukraine away from any hopes for EU membership or NATO membership. Because certainly when there is instability in the states, in a state, it will be difficult for it to align itself further with international organizations until it resolves its instabilities and until it regains control of all of its territory. So Russia exploits creates and exploits these instabilities to and can manipulate their intensity, depending on how much alignment with the West Ukraine seeks. The future for the region is quite uncertain, and essentially depends on whether Ukraine is going to move closer to the West and vice versa, if the West is going to seek to make Ukraine a NATO member or a European Union member. If that happens, we can expect more instability in Ukraine, unfortunately. But the best hopes for the region are a frozen conflict, which at least it's legal uncertainty, but promises some peace for the local populations.